as flagged here is former Labor Minister Mike Kelly.
Platforms. And also the way that that's been used to divide our community and country. That needs to be a much more laser-like focus and cooperating with projects that are underway amongst our allied nations to cooperate on that. Secondly, of course, we're concerned that the narrow-cast inquiry that's underway at the moment is very much welcome. It has to happen. Immediate after-action reviews are important, but it's very narrow-cast. And we understand that there's a broader ecosystem at play here that has created the incubator for the sort of terrorist challenges we're facing. And it's a new age of terrorism that we're dealing with, and we need all of our country, all of our agencies to understand how many dimensions this operates on, the sorts of disaggregated terrorism activity and support regimes exist, how they cast the mindsets that enables someone to look down a scope at a 10-year-old little girl running to her mother and shoot her dead. So we need to unpack all of that. But thirdly, of course, we're very concerned that many members of our community need healing. I'm sure this has been triggering even for families of the Bali disaster, 9/11, the London attacks, etc., who will be concerned now that all of this is coming to our shores. So for the sake of the healing of our community, and in particular the Jewish community, we have to understand what a Royal Commission can bring to that endeavour, as governments and oppositions had to do in relation to the Defence and Veterans Royal Commission into suicide. Both parties pushed back on that originally, but the broader public, the grieving families, the suffering veterans, all understood that this had to happen, and it gave us a pathway forward on how to resolve those issues. But also, it served as a healing process for those who were suffering. So we would call on the government to listen to the voices of Australia now. Those voices have been made very clear. We need a response that understands all of these multi-dimensions that will help bring our country together. Thank you.
Mike has been in politics a long time. Can you talk us through why you think the Prime Minister might be resisting these calls? You've worked with him personally, and what appeal would you make to him at this time?
Well, all governments, all agencies, they come out of the gate looking at something very narrowly to begin with. And what we're seeing, of course, is every day new revelations, new information, and a need to sit back and look at the fact that this is a national challenge. It happened in Sydney, but it's a broader challenge for the nation, and we need national leadership. And so what I would hope is that as caucus comes back and they start plugging in the reflections and information that's hitting their electorate offices and them directly, they can feed that into the process, that the government can then come out and say, look, we've heard what the community has to say, we've seen this new information, and we have decided now to act. And we will give them all the credit in the world for recognising that. We don't want to attack anybody here, we just want our country to be safe and healthy. And so if they were to do that, they could also draw a red line underneath the last 2 years of what's happened, question marks over responses, and begin the remediation of their relationship with the Australian community that's been deeply concerned about Islamist extremism, particularly the Jewish community.
So why do you think there has been such resistance from Anthony Albanese when it comes to calling a Royal Commission?
As I say, I think governments and agencies come out of the gate looking at things very narrowly and tactically. But as time goes on, you start to see the broader issues and you start to receive more information. And as I say, governments were under pressure, opposition was under pressure in relation to the Veterans Royal Commission, heard their people and moved on. So we used to say in the army, you've got three choices: lead, follow or get out of the way. And I think this is a case of governments and democratic governments in particular saying, there's my people, I need to follow them.
One of the latest arguments from the government today not to do this, and they mentioned the Defence Suicide Royal Commission. They say that in that case there was this uncertainty about exactly where the problems were coming from, what the response should look like, and that's why they did the Royal Commission, whereas the view in this case seems to be that they know who the perpetrators were, they know physically most of what happened, so they don't believe it's necessary in this case. How do you view that reasoning, given that's now the case the government's putting forward?
Well, comments like that really show that there's kind of a lack of understanding here in the broader context. OK, so we've heard comments about there being no terrorist cell uncovered or that these were lone actors, but That to me signals a misunderstanding of how terrorism operates these days and the disaggregated nature of terrorism. How people are groomed, how people are recruited, how they're given the ability to acquire weapons, how they're empowered and enabled to develop improvised explosive devices, and how are we set up as a nation to be able to track those data points effectively. And are our agencies equipped with the best tools that are labour-saving, that can enable you to follow up situations like we've had here with Bondi, where there was a bright red thread to one individual. And in relation to the Veterans Royal Commission, well, you could narrowcast down to each individual case if you like, but we understood there were broader cultural and other issues at play. And so those were teased out properly, and the appropriate measures and guidance has now been created. This is very much similar. We need to understand all of the dynamics that are at play here and address them systematically, nationally.
In the letter, obviously, a lot of former Labor people, obviously without naming names, are there any current Labor ministers that have spoken to you about how this is being handled? What have they said? Are they privately backing calls for a Royal Commission, Federal?
Yes, this is really working on two levels. There have been obviously former MPs who've had experience themselves in either security, Royal Commissions, etc., who have wanted to be public, and as we've done this on the fly, more are coming forward to us saying they want to be associated with it. But there are also people, because of their positions or their previous roles, feel more comfortable dealing with this issue privately. So they have indicated that they're going to take this up with the Prime Minister and ministers separately and privately.
On the Royal Commission timing, so one expert said it could be problematic if it could send us the incident while the legal case is ongoing. Would you be happy then to let the legal case run its course and see what comes out of that inquiry into the agencies, seeing as you spoke about radicalisation and stuff, and then have a Royal Commission, or do you think it needs to be called immediately?
When I joined the Army, it was off the back of two Royal Commissions conducted by Justice Marsden Hope, who also ran a protective security review in the middle of those. And we had the Hilton bombing at the time, and it issued interim reports. It was able to do behind doors, closed classified secured hearings, and make recommendations and make decisions as they went. And that really shaped our posture in relation to terrorism for the next 2 decades, and our intelligence posture as well. And so, for example, it was decided that we wouldn't develop a gendarmerie third force, that the close quarter combat role for counter-terrorism would be assigned to the SAS. So for the first few years of my Army life, I spent exercising with the SAS and state police. A Royal Commission can operate in the background, it can do things, and in a way that does not affect ongoing criminal proceedings, and can do it in a secure and classified way, which underlines the difference between a Commonwealth Royal Commission and the State Royal Commission, which cannot compel Commonwealth agencies to reveal information and to require cooperation. But more importantly than that to me is I know there are Commonwealth officers who will not want to speak fully and openly unless they have the legal protections of a Commonwealth Royal Commission. I've had colleagues in the past, for example in relation to the Iraq War, who wanted to say a lot of things about that situation, but were denied the opportunity. They weren't going to speak to the media, and they wanted that protection. Commonwealth officers will need that, will seek that, and we know there are some out there who want that.
How broad would you like in terms of reference to be? Would you like, as the opposition has suggested, this inquiry to also look at anti-semitism on university campuses, other hate groups, etc.?
Well, what we know is that foreign actors now, there's a very tight process of collaboration amongst Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that particularly since 2016 have been exploiting the opportunity that social media and these types of platforms provide them, looking for the opportunity to promote disunity in our liberal democracies. And liberal democracies are on the defensive worldwide right now. And so, as I mentioned, there are 3 projects that the Defence Advanced Research Project Agency in the US is pursuing in this respect. We could make that a part of our AUKUS Pillar 2 technology cooperation. So it is a situation where we need to understand how that is affecting people, how it's being used, what sort of forms of communication are occurring. And I'll highlight in relation to the Hamas attack on October the 7th, they had understood that they needed a new way of doing business because of technical capabilities. So a lot of their communication was done orally and on paper, back to old hydraulic style, to avoid detection. And so a lot of terrorist organisations are adapting to these situations and using these techniques. But that evolution and creation of the mindset is the battlefield, the minefield of the landscape of the mind that we have to tackle preeminently. And everything that we can do to direct our activities toward that is critical. And a lot of that is going on our campuses. And how people are being manipulated, demonstrations are being infiltrated and driven in particular directions. We need to understand all of that.
You've been advocating in this sort of space for a long time within the Labor Party. Do you think that there has been a level of complacency or perhaps even denial when it comes to the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen in the community?
Look, I think it's universally been a bit of a security bubble we've operated in Australia. We've never had an incident of this scale ever before in our country. And Australians in general have felt secure and safe in that respect, that it was something that would happen overseas. But Bondi has woken us all up. I think Australia's security bubble has been burst. And an understanding now that there is an issue here, the ability of our agencies to do their job properly. Have they been given all of the tools necessary to do the labour-saving stuff, to create the data points that you need to stitch together to create the red alerts that pop up on people's computer screens as operators and analysts. So that is something that needs to be considered more broadly, and that's what we hope a Royal Commission would tackle.
So do you think that there has been a level of complacency from the government specifically rather than just the broader community?
Well, governments tend to deal with events and situations as they are confronted. And clearly that has been something that we've seen evolving over the last 2 years. And certainly in my time, I spent 4 years on the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. I was Bill Shorten's National Security Advisor. I was in the Defence Portfolio and 20 years in the Army working on all of this stuff. And I've watched the evolution, and particularly in the Intelligence and Security Committee, was trying to raise the alarm bells about some of these things. But the agencies really have a capacity question in just how wide and how deep they can be spread. So partly this is about empowering them with the tools so they don't have to spread the acquisition of tools over several budgets, and can be on a par with the agencies we like to compare ourselves with in the United Kingdom and the US, etc.
On that issue, Mark, are you concerned by revelations the AFP had closed down a surveillance team just weeks before the Bondi attack?
I think there's an issue here about horsepower at a few levels. And there's also an issue, as you've seen emerging, about the communication amongst federal and state agencies. And those silos need to be broken down. And they've been obvious for a long time. They were evident in the Link Cafe siege. And there are the tools out there whereby you can create a passage of information that's protected by access controls and permissions regimes that will protect privacy, that won't create any adverse effect to criminal proceedings, but people see all the relevant information they need to see and can share the information available to them. We're not well set up for that right now, and it's a real gap in our capability and a risk to our security.
Would you like to play a formal role in some kind of inquiry, whether it's a federal Royal Commission, whether it's the state Royal Commission? You've laid out your experience. Would you like to play a formal role in that?
Look, I'm happy to consult and talk to anyone who'd like to talk. Got a lot of granddad duty these days, hopefully. But anything that would help our national security, it's been a lifelong mission of passion for me. And I'm adjunct professor at the National Security Institute out at the University of Canberra with my good friend General Leader Peter Lay. And we're hoping to, continue to contribute in our dotage on these sorts of issues. But I do have some currency in the space, so it's up to me to take advantage of the scar tissue that I've collected for the best interests of the country. So.
Would you say you're disappointed?
Look, I think this is a rolling process, and it does.
That's Mike Kelly, the former Labor Minister and currently the co-convener of Labor Friends of Israel, one of more than 20 Labor figures calling for the PM to rethink a Royal Commission. I want to take you now to Washington, D.C., Capitol Hill. We are hearing live from the Gang of Eight. This is Chuck Schumer, the Democrat Senate leader, after being briefed on what happened in Venezuela.
States engages in this kind of regime change and so-called nation building, it always ends up hurting the United States. I left the briefing feeling that it would again.
How much will this cost taxpayers, Senator Schumer?
All right, a short statement there from Chuck Schumer. He's been getting a behind-closed-door briefing from the Trump administration on what happened in Venezuela. We want to take you back, though, now here to Canberra, inside Parliament House, where we're hearing from former Labor Minister Mike Kelly.
He used to come out and say, yes, look, you know, this was a screw-up. I apologise for it. Let's learn the lessons and let's fix it. It's as simple as that.
And just make the point before that officials would feel more secure under the provisions of the Commonwealth Royal Commission. So they would be more safe speaking out under that as opposed to the Richardson review. Is that right?
Yes, I've seen it, as I said, in the past. I knew someone who had some really important information to provide about the Iraq War. Was actually a civilian in defence. He just wouldn't do it unless he had that protection. And that's particularly why you need a federal royal commission, and agencies will be reluctant to fully open the kimono in relation to a New South Wales royal commission, and it won't have the power to compel that. And we know that a federal royal commission, I've heard comments that, oh, the victims would have to travel to Canberra, and they'd have to testify twice if there's a New South Wales royal commission. Well, a New South Wales royal commission could stand down if there was a federal one. But in addition to that, royal commissions sit anywhere they like. They could go up and squat in Sydney for as long as it was necessary to hear the victims. And I remind people that it's the families and the victims themselves who are asking for this, just as they did for the Veterans Royal Commission.
And Mike Kelly making that comparison to the Veteran Suicide Royal Commission, that it did take a long time before governments eventually bowed to pressure, listened to the families and followed suit. We're seeing that with the victims' families from the Bondi massacre. They too have been calling for this Royal Commission.